The warehouse. I'm not sure how to begin, but I'll try. My name is Jake, and for the past year I've been struggling to convince myself that I'm not crazy. Maybe writing this will help, but honestly, I don't think anything can. There are some things you can't unsee, some things you can't forget, no matter how hard you try. It started on a Friday night, kind of night where nothing exciting was supposed to happen. I was out with my best friend, Matt. We'd been friends since college, kind of guy you could count on for anything. That night, we were just grabbing a couple of beers, talking about nothing, trying to shake off the stress of work. Matt had just landed a job as a security guard for this big abandoned warehouse complex outside of town. It wasn't glamorous work, but the pay was good, and he got to spend most of his shifts sitting around, watching movies on his phone. "You should come check it out," Matt said, after his third beer. He was grinning, a bit too much. "I can show you around, sneak you in. Place is huge, man. Creepy as hell." "I don't know, man," I replied, glancing at the clock. It was already past 11. "I'm good here. Creepy old buildings aren't really my thing." "Come on, don't be a wuss," he laughed, nudging me. "Just for a bit. You'll see." "Cool. We can mess around, pretend it's one of those ghost hunting shows." I should have said no. Looking back, I really wish I had. But Matt could be convincing when he wanted to be. After a bit more prodding, I caved. The drive to the warehouse was quiet. The streets were deserted, not a single car in sight. As we got closer, I started to feel a knot in my stomach. Something about the area just felt wrong. The warehouse loomed in the distance, this massive, hulking structure, half covered in shadows. It looked ancient, like it hadn't been touched in decades. "Here we are," Matt said, parking the car and hopping out. He seemed way too excited about this. The building was even creepier up close. The windows were cracked and grimy, and the walls were covered in graffiti. There was this weird, musty smell, like old wood and something else, something metallic, maybe rust. Matt used his keycard to swipe us in through a side door. Inside, the place was a maze of concrete halls and steel beams, the kind of place you'd expect to find in an old horror movie. "All right, I gotta do a quick patrol," Matt said, pulling out a flashlight. "Wanna come with?" I shrugged. "Sure." As we walked deeper into the warehouse, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The silence was too heavy, like the air itself was thick, and the way the flashlight beam danced along the walls, casting long, distorted shadows, didn't help. "Place is a dump, huh?" Matt said, breaking the silence. "Yeah, seriously, what was this place used for?" I asked, stepping over a pile of debris. "Storage, I think, but it's been abandoned for years." We reached a large room, and Matt stopped, shining his flashlight around. The place was massive, like an airplane hangar. Stacks of old crates and rusted machinery were scattered everywhere, covered in dust and cobwebs. And then, out of nowhere, we heard it. A sound. A low, rumbling noise, almost like a growl. It was so faint, at first I thought I imagined it. Matt froze. "Did you hear that?" I nodded slowly, my heart starting to race. "Yeah, what the hell was that?" "I don't know," Matt muttered, shining his light around, but there was nothing. Just empty space and shadows. We stood there, listening, but the sound didn't come again. "Probably just an animal," Matt said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Rats or something." "Big rats, I guess," I muttered. We kept walking, deeper into the warehouse. The further we went, the more unsettling the place felt. The walls were lined with more crates, and there were odd tools lying around, things that didn't look like they belonged in any normal warehouse. And then, we found the door. It was this heavy, rusted metal door, almost hidden behind a stack of crates. Matt pointed his flashlight at it, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Was this here before?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. Matt shook his head. "I don't think so. I've never noticed it." Without thinking, he grabbed the handle and pulled. The door creaked open, revealing a staircase leading down into the dark. "No way," I said immediately. "I'm not going down there." Matt turned to me, grinning like an idiot. "What, scared? Come on, Jake. It's probably just a basement or something." I wanted to leave. Every instinct was screaming at me to get out of there. But Matt was already heading down, and I wasn't about to let him go alone. The staircase seemed to go on forever, spiraling down into the earth. The air was thick, damp, and the further we went, colder it got. Matt's flashlight flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. "This is crazy," I muttered under my breath. "We should go back." Matt didn't answer. He just kept walking, his eyes focused on the bottom of the stairs. Finally, we reached the end. The stairs opened up into a large underground chamber. It was huge, way bigger than I expected, with old rusted machines lining the walls. And in the center of the room, there was a metal table. Something was lying on it, covered by a dirty, tattered sheet. "What the hell is this place?" I whispered. Matt walked toward the table, his flashlight aimed at the sheet. He reached out, hesitating for a moment, before pulling it back. I wish he hadn't. Underneath the sheet was a body, or at least what was left of one. The skin was gray, shriveled, clinging to the bones. The eyes were gone, the mouth hanging open in a twisted, silent scream. And carved into its chest in deep, jagged letters was a single word: run. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my ears. "Matt, we need to go. Now." But Matt just stood there, staring at the body, his face pale. "Jake, I didn't know. I didn't." "What do you mean you didn't know?" I snapped, grabbing his arm. "Let's go." He didn't move. His eyes were locked on the body. And then I heard it again, that growling sound. But this time it wasn't faint. It was loud, echoing through the chamber, coming from all around us. I turned, shining my flashlight around, but there was nothing. Just shadows. But the sound kept getting closer, deeper, like something was moving toward us. "Matt!" I yelled, shaking him. "We have to go." He snapped out of it, finally, and we both ran back toward the stairs. The growling was louder now, so loud I could feel it vibrating in my chest. I didn't dare look back. All I could think about was getting out. We reached the top of the stairs, bursting into the hallway. I slammed the door shut behind us, my hands shaking. "What the hell was that?" I gasped, leaning against the wall. Matt didn't answer. He was breathing heavily, his face pale, eyes wide. "I don't know, man. I don't know." I thought we were safe, that we had escaped whatever was down there. But then the door started to rattle, slowly at first and then harder. Something was behind it. Something was trying to get out. "We need to leave," I whispered, backing away. Matt nodded and we started running. The halls seemed to twist and turn in ways I didn't remember, but we kept moving, our footsteps echoing in the empty warehouse. And then, suddenly, Matt stopped. "What are you doing?" I asked, panicked. He turned to me, his face blank, his eyes empty. "It's too late." Before I could respond, the door behind us slammed open. I don't remember much after that. Just running, darkness, and the sound of something terrible following us. By some miracle, I made it out, but Matt didn't. When the police found me, I was wandering along the highway, covered in dirt and blood. They asked me what happened, but I couldn't explain it. How could I? No one believed me, of course. They said Matt had gone missing, that he'd probably gotten lost in the warehouse and had an accident. But I know the truth. The warehouse took him. Just like it wanted to take me. If you ever find yourself near that place, don't go inside. Don't listen to the voices. Don't follow the stairs. Because once you do, you won't ever come back. The Experiment. My name is Ethan, and I know you won't believe me, but I don't care anymore. I've already lost everything. This is all I have left. The story, the truth. You might laugh, roll your eyes, or think this is some kind of joke, but I promise you it's real. It all started when I got the job offer. It was a small classified ad, buried in the back of some tech magazine. Looking for research participants, $5,000 for 1 week of work. No experience necessary. It seemed like a scam at first. $5,000 was $5,000. I'd been unemployed for months, my savings were running out, and I was desperate. The interview was strange. It took place in a sleek, modern office building downtown. One of those places with floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture. The guy who interviewed me was cold, professional. He never smiled. I remember his name, Dr. Keller. He was in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, with graying hair and sharp blue eyes. "We're conducting an experiment," he explained, sliding a folder across the desk. "All we need is for you to stay in a controlled environment for 7 days. You'll be monitored, but you'll have complete privacy, no contact with the outside world. Do you have any issues with that?" "None at all," I said, trying to sound eager. He nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. "Sign this, and we'll begin tomorrow." Looking back, I should have walked out right then. There was something about him, something unsettling. But I signed the contract, not even bothering to read the fine print. I needed the money. The next day, they picked me up in a black van with tinted windows. No logos, no company name, just a blank, unmarked van. 2 men in black suits were inside, their faces expressionless. They didn't say a word during the ride, and I didn't ask questions. I figured they were just security. We drove for what felt like hours, leaving the city behind and heading out into the countryside. Eventually, we pulled up to a large, windowless building. It looked like some sort of bunker, all concrete and steel. There was no sign of life around. No houses, no other cars. Just empty fields stretching as far as I could see. "Welcome to the facility," one of the men said as they escorted me inside. The inside was sterile, white walls, bright fluorescent lights. They led me down a series of hallways, each one identical to the last, until we reached a heavy metal door. Dr. Keller was waiting for me. "Room 104, he said, handing me a key card. "This will be your home for the next 7 days." Room 104 was small but comfortable. There was a bed, a desk, a bathroom, and a small kitchenette. There were no windows, and the only door was the one I'd come through. It was eerily silent, kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. "You'll be observed through the cameras," Dr. Keller explained. "But don't worry, they're only for research purposes. You won't be disturbed unless it's absolutely necessary." He handed me a small black notebook. "If you experience anything unusual, write it down. This is important." I didn't understand what he meant by unusual, but I nodded, figuring it was all part of the experiment. They left me alone after that, and I settled in. The first day was uneventful. I read some books, cooked a small meal, and tried to relax. The isolation was strange, but not unbearable. I figured it would be easy money. I was wrong. It started on the second night. I woke up in the middle of the night to a faint humming sound. It was so soft, I almost thought I was imagining it. I got out of bed and listened, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The room was silent again. I shrugged it off as some kind of electrical noise and went back to bed. But the next morning, when I woke up, I noticed something odd. The door to my room was open. Just a crack, barely noticeable. But definitely not how I'd left it. My heart started to race. There was no way someone had come into my room. I would have heard them, right? I checked the hallway, but it was empty. No sign of anyone. I wrote it down in the notebook, just like Dr. Keller had told me to. Door was open. Not sure how. Could be the wind. Need to check. Following day, I noticed something else. The bed had moved. Not much, just an inch or two, but enough that I could tell. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even gotten out of bed during the night. I stared at it for a long time, trying to rationalize it. Maybe I'd bumped it in my sleep, maybe the floor was uneven, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. When I wrote it down in the notebook, my hand was shaking. By the 4th day, things were getting worse. Much worse. I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps, echoing down the hallway outside my room. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, listening. The footsteps were getting closer, closer, until they stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, waiting for something to happen. The door didn't open. The footsteps didn't continue. I stayed awake for hours, too scared to move, listening to the silence. When morning came, I checked the hallway again. Nothing. No one. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat on the bed, trying to calm down. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The notebook. It wasn't where I'd left it. It was on the floor, open to the page I'd written the night before. The words were still there, but they weren't mine anymore. Someone or something written underneath them. "We see you." I lost track of time after that. The days blurred together, each one worse than the last. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating. The humming sound was back, louder now, constant. It was driving me insane. And the footsteps, they kept coming. Every night, they got closer, kept slower, as if whoever or whatever was outside was taking their time, waiting for the perfect moment. By the 6th day, I was completely unraveling. The bed was moving more now, shifting across the room as if it had a mind of its own. The door opened and closed on its own, no matter how many times I locked it. And the notebook, it was filling up with words I didn't write. Almost time. Coming. I screamed at the cameras, begged them to let me out, but no one answered. Cameras just stared down at me. old and unblinking. On the final night, I snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. The footsteps, the humming, the whispers in the walls, it was all too much. I grabbed the notebook and threw it across the room, screaming at the top of my lungs. "What do you want from me?" There was no answer, just silence. Then, door opened. Not a crack this time. It swung wide open, revealing the dark hallway beyond. I could see shadows moving in the distance, figures that weren't quite human, slowly making their way toward me. Backed up, my heart racing. No. The figures came closer, their movements jerky, unnatural. I could see them now, tall, thin, with 2 long limbs and faces that were all wrong. No eyes, just empty, hollow sockets. Their mouths were twisted into smiles, but there was nothing human about them. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. I just needed to get out. I sprinted down the hallway, the walls narrowing around me, the lights flickering. The humming sound was deafening now, vibrating through my skull. I burst through door after door, but they all led me back to the same place, room 104. No matter how far I ran, I always ended up back there. And then they caught up to me. I don't remember much after that, just pain. Blinding, searing pain, and the sound of them laughing, that horrible inhuman laughter echoing in my ears. When I woke up, I was back in room 104. The door was closed, the lights were on, everything was normal. Except for one thing. I wasn't alone. Dr. Keller was standing in the corner watching me with those cold blue eyes. "It's over, Ethan," said softly, almost sympathetically. "The experiment is complete." I wanted to scream, to attack him. My body wouldn't move. I was paralyzed, stuck in that bed, trapped in my own nightmare. "You've done well," he continued, writing something down in his notebook. "Better than we expected." I tried to speak, but no words came out. Dr. Keller smiled. "Don't worry, you won't remember any of this soon." He turned to leave, and as he did, the last thing I heard was his voice, calm and clinical. "Subject 104, terminated." I woke up in a hospital bed, the bright lights blinding me. There were doctors all around me, talking in hushed tones. They said I had been found unconscious on the side of a highway, my body covered in cuts and bruises. No one knew how I had gotten there. I was disoriented, my memories foggy. Everything that had happened in that facility felt like a distant dream. A nightmare I couldn't shake. One that didn't fully make sense. "Ethan, do you remember anything?" one of the doctors asked gently. I shook my head, though it wasn't entirely true. I remembered something. Flashes of a dark hallway, a door that wouldn't stay shut, and figures with no eyes. But I couldn't piece it together. My mind felt like it had been shattered and hastily put back together, the cracks still visible. Weeks passed, and I was discharged from the hospital. They said I was lucky to be alive, but I didn't feel lucky. I felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. Something inside me had changed. At night, I would wake up covered in sweat, hearing that same low humming sound from the facility. It never went away. Sometimes, I would hear footsteps outside my apartment door, slow and deliberate, just like before. But when I looked, no one was there. I tried to forget. Got a job, went through the motions, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Every time I turned a corner, I half expected to see Dr. Keller standing there, notebook in hand, smiling that cold, detached smile. One day, a package arrived at my door. There was no return address, no markings at all, just a plain brown box. My heart sank the moment I saw it. I knew, deep down, what it was. I opened it slowly, my hands trembling. Inside was a small, black notebook. The same notebook from the facility. My pulse quickened. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't stop myself. I flipped it open, and there, in my own handwriting, were the words I hadn't written. "We're not done." I threw the notebook across the room, my chest heaving with panic. I had left that place. I had escaped. How could this be happening again? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a cruel prank, someone messing with me. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me after the trauma. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I hadn't escaped. Whatever had happened in that facility, it had followed me. That night, I locked every door, every window. I turned on all the lights and sat on the couch, staring at the notebook across the room. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I was waiting. For what? I didn't know. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. The humming. It was louder this time, vibrating through the walls, filling the entire apartment. My head throbbed, and my vision blurred. And then I heard the footsteps. They started at the end of the hallway, just like before. Slow, deliberate, getting closer with every step. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the front door, willing it to stay shut. The footsteps stopped right outside. My breath caught in my throat as the doorknob slowly turned just a fraction of an inch. I couldn't move. I was frozen. My eyes locked on the door, waiting for it to open. But it didn't. Instead, I heard a voice, soft, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. "We see you," I snapped. I grabbed the notebook, flipped to the last page, and started writing. My hand moved on its own, the words flowing out of me as if someone else was controlling it. "What do you want?" I scribbled, the letters shaky. For a moment, nothing happened. The apartment was silent, the humming gone. I let out a shaky breath, thinking maybe it was over. Maybe I had imagined it all. But then, the page began to change. The ink shifted, rearranging itself into new words. My heart stopped as I read the message. "Come back." I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I packed a bag, not knowing where I was going, but knowing I couldn't stay there. Couldn't explain it, but I knew what they wanted. They hadn't finished the experiment. They weren't done with me. I drove for hours, aimlessly, trying to outrun the nightmare. But no matter where I went, the feeling of being watched followed me. Every shadow seemed too long, every sound too deliberate. The world felt twisted, wrong, like I was living in someone else's reality. It wasn't until I saw the sign that I knew where I was going. "Welcome to Red Creek, population 1,274. The town was small, a place no one would think twice about. But I recognized it immediately. I'd seen it before. On the drive to the facility. I hadn't realized at the time, but the facility was close, very close. Kind of place you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. And I was looking for it now. The road wound deeper into the woods, the trees growing thicker, the sky darker. I knew I was getting close. The air felt heavier, like I was being pulled back, like the experiment was calling me. And then I saw it. The building was just as I remembered, concrete, windowless, hidden among the trees. The van was parked outside, the same unmarked black van that had picked me up the first time. I pulled over, my hands shaking as I stepped out of the car. My legs felt like lead as I approached the door, the memories flooding back. The humming started again, louder now, vibrating through my skull. I swiped my T-card. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the facility was the same, sterile, cold, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. My footsteps echoed through the empty halls as I made my way to room 104. I didn't know what I was expecting. Part of me hoped I would find answers, some explanation for the nightmare I'd been living. But another part of me, the part that had been twisted by fear, knew there were no answers. Only more questions. The door to room 104 was slightly ajar, just like the first time I'd found it open. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. Something inside me pushed forward. I stepped inside. The room was empty. Bed, the desk, everything was gone, stripped bare. The walls were covered in writing, hundreds, maybe thousands of words scrawled in black ink. I couldn't make sense of any of it. It was like a madman had taken over, filling the room with his thoughts. And in the center of the room, on the floor, was the notebook. I picked it up, my hands trembling. Pages were blank, except for the very last one. "Welcome back." I don't remember much after that, just pain. Blinding, searing pain, and the sound of that horrible humming, louder than ever, vibrating through every cell in my body. The world twisted, warped, and then nothing. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed again. The doctor said I'd been found near the facility, wandering through the woods in a daze. They asked me what had happened, but I couldn't tell them. I couldn't tell them that the experiment wasn't over, that it would never be over. I know they'll come for me again. I don't know when, but I can feel it. The humming is back, louder now, constant. The footsteps are getting closer every night. If you're reading this, don't come looking for me. Don't try to find the facility, as once you do, you won't ever escape. They'll make sure of that. The experiment is never over. The Watcher. It's been 6 months since it all happened, and I still can't sleep through the night. The events replay in my mind like some broken record, stuck on repeat, dragging me back to that town, to that house. I wish I could make you understand what it felt like. The fear, the hopelessness, but words never seemed to be enough. My name is James. I'm from a small town in Ohio. Normal guy, average life. I worked at a hardware store, had a few close friends, and spent most weekends drinking beers and watching football. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing. Until I met her. It all started with Emily. We met online. Typical story. Swipe, match, chat. We hit it off pretty quickly, shared interests in books, movies, and hiking. She lived about an hour away in a little town called Elmhurst, which was barely even on the map. Population, maybe 1,000 people. One of those places you drive through without even realizing it. We chatted for a few weeks before she invited me to visit. I was excited, nervous even. She seemed perfect. Maybe too perfect now that I think about it. I should have noticed the signs sooner. I should have paid attention when things started feeling off, but by then I was already in too deep. I drove up to Elmhurst on a Friday afternoon. The town was as small as I expected. Quaint, quiet, little eerie, in that too perfect way. Emily lived in a house just outside the town, right on the edge of a dense forest. The house was old but charming, with a wraparound porch and big windows that looked out into the trees. It seemed peaceful. When I pulled up, she was standing on the porch, smiling. "James," she called out, waving me over. Her smile was warm, genuine. All my nerves faded away. "Hey, Emily," I said, stepping out of the car. She hugged me, and I immediately felt at ease. Felt right. You must be tired after the drive. Come inside. I made lunch. I followed her inside. The house was cozy, filled with mismatched furniture and old photographs. It smelled like fresh bread, and the kitchen had this rustic charm like something out of a movie. "Place is great," I said, looking around. "You've got good taste." Emily laughed. "Oh, it's nothing fancy, but I like it here. It's quiet, you know?" I nodded. I liked the quiet too. There was something about this place. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The first night was uneventful. We had dinner, watched a movie, and talked late into the night. It wasn't until I was getting ready for bed that things started to feel off. Emily had given me the guest room. It was simple, just a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out into the backyard. Forest beyond was dark, dense, almost suffocating. I remember looking out at it, feeling a chill run down my spine. The trees seemed too still, too quiet. I shut the curtains and climbed into bed. That's when I heard it. A soft tapping, like someone gently knocking on wood. I sat up, listening. It was faint, coming from outside, but it was unmistakable. I got up, pulled back the curtain, and peered out into the darkness. Nothing. Just the trees. I stared for a while, half expecting something to move. Everything was still. Too still. I shook it off and went back to bed. The next day I asked Emily about it. "Hey, do you ever hear strange noises at night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She looked at me, her smile faltering for a split second before she shrugged. "Sometimes. It's an old house, you know. It makes noises." I nodded, but I didn't believe her. Something about her answer felt rehearsed, like she'd said it 100 times before. But I didn't push it. I didn't want to seem paranoid. That day we went hiking in the forest behind her house. It was beautiful, the kind of place that feels untouched by time. But as we walked deeper into the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "You okay?" Emily asked, noticing my unease. "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied. "Just, these woods are kind of creepy, huh?" She laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You get used to it." That night, I couldn't sleep. The tapping was back, louder this time. It was rhythmic, like someone drumming their fingers against the wall. I got up, annoyed, and opened the window to look outside. Nothing. I shut the window, but the tapping continued. It was coming from the walls now, all around me. I pressed my ear to the wall, trying to figure out where it was coming from. And then I heard it. A voice. Whispering. So faint I could barely make out the words. "Help me." I stumbled back, my heart racing. I turned on the light, scanned the room, but it was empty. I stood there panting, my mind racing. Was I going crazy? Was this some kind of prank? I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I confronted Emily. "There's something weird going on in this house," I said, my voice shaking. "I keep hearing noises. Tapping, whispering." Emily's face went pale. "James, you're just tired. It's nothing." "It's not nothing," I insisted. "I heard someone asking for help." She stared at me, her eyes wide with fear. "James, please, just drop it." No, I said, standing my ground. What the hell is going on here? She didn't answer. She just turned and walked out of the room. That was the day everything changed. I decided to leave. Couldn't take it anymore. The house, the woods, Emily's strange behavior, it was all too much. I packed my bag and told Emily I was heading out. Please don't go, she begged, tears in her eyes. It's not safe out there. Not safe? I scoffed. What are you talking about? You're the one keeping secrets. She grabbed my arm, her grip tight. You don't understand. You can't leave. He'll find you. Who? I demanded, yanking my arm free. Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. The Watcher. I left anyway. I didn't believe her. I thought she was crazy. But as I drove away from the house, the air seemed to grow heavier, thick with tension. The trees lining the road loomed over me, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. And then, my car stopped. The engine just cut out, right in the middle of the road. I cursed, hitting the steering wheel in frustration. I tried the ignition again and again, but it wouldn't start. That's when I saw him. Figure, standing in the middle of the road, just beyond the reach of my headlight. Tall, thin, with impossibly long limbs and a face obscured by shadows. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. Just stood there, watching. My blood ran cold. I locked the doors, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure took a step forward, then another, slowly closing the distance between us. I fumbled for my phone, but there was no signal. I was trapped. The tapping started again, this time from inside the car. I whipped my head around, but there was nothing. Just the sound, growing louder and louder, as if it was coming from inside my skull. I looked back at the figure. He was gone. I don't remember how I got back to the house. The next thing I knew, I was banging on the door, screaming for Emily to let me in. She opened the door, her face streaked with tears. He found you, didn't he? She whispered. I nodded, too shaken to speak. She pulled me inside, locking the door behind us. He's always watching, James. He's always out there, waiting. Who is he? I demanded. What does he want? I don't know, she said, her voice trembling. No one knows. He's been here for as long as anyone can remember. Some say he's a curse, others say he's something worse. But once you see him, once he finds you, you can't escape. We spent the next few days in the house, curtains drawn, lights off. Every night the tapping would start, louder and more insistent. Sometimes I would hear footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, circling the house, and always I could feel him, watching. One night I woke up to find Emily standing by the window, staring out into the darkness. What are you doing? I whispered, my voice hoarse with fear. She didn't turn around. He's getting closer. I rushed to her, pulling her away from the window. We have to leave. We can't stay here. It won't matter, she said, her voice hollow. You can't run from him. I didn't listen. I packed a bag, grabbed Emily's hand, and we ran. We drove as far as we could, not stopping until we reached the next town over. For a moment I thought we were safe, but that night as I lay in the motel bed, I heard it again. The tapping. And I knew he had found us. That was 6 months ago. We've been running ever since, moving from town to town, never staying in one place for too long. But no matter where we go, he's always there, watching, waiting.